Welcome to another episode of an intimate conversation with women of color. I am your host, Deneen L. Garrett, and I am very excited to introduce you to today's guest. For those who have listened or watched, you know that I have three favorite podcasters. Two of them have already been on the show, and my guest today completes the trifecta. So today's guest is Stephen A. Hart. Stephen is a marketer, podcaster, brand strategist, speaker, and entrepreneur. Stephen helps leaders and entrepreneurs blaze their trails with confidence by designing a brand they live and leave. Stephen is also a husband to Kristen, a father to Layla and Nigel, and a son and a brother, and so much more, which you'll be able to read about in the show notes. Stephen, tell us more about you.
Yes, Deneen, first off, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate being here. I'm so excited to talk with you. You touched on it. I'm a grateful, proud husband and self-proclaimed best dad ever. Originally from the island of Jamaica. And so I love to joke that, within my DNA, I have about a dozen different job titles. But at my heart, I have a creative gene that I was blessed with from my dad being a chef, but a creative, genius, an artist, a painter, writer, interior decorator, florist, and so he has all these artistic, talents that kind of spun off in me in a different way as a marketer and brand strategist, and I just always had an entrepreneurial gene. And at this point, I'm really at a place in my life where impact is what I'm after, and with Trailblazers over the last 5 years, really kind of found a tribe that I really live to serve and pour into, and by way of doing that, feel like I'm laying the right foundation and planting the right seeds to serve Layla and Nigel down the road.
Yeah, no, you're definitely doing that. And so I mentioned the trifecta, right? So I first heard of you through Minda Harts. And
my sister.
Yeah, your sister. And, you've been on each other's shows, if I'm not mistaken. And then Simone Morris has been on both of your shows. And so that's the trifecta right there. And as far as that laying seeds, that exactly has happened because, I just shared with you how one of your college buddies and someone you've had on the show before, we work for the same company. And so he and I just kind of connected. But, with Minda actually is going to speak at my company. So she's speaking in October. And I was a contributor on a book, Upward. And that book, I was connected to that through Simone. And so yes, this is a tribe. For me, it's a sisterhood with a sister. So, you're kind of like, I don't know, kind of what grandfathered in, although that's not the right word, but honorary.
Oh, it's good. I'm a brother from another,
Right.
Yeah,
right.
and both of those women that you just mentioned, Simone and Minda, have both been on a podcast, both sisters from another mister. Amazing women. Doing amazing things and leaving their own impact on the world. So I love it. As are you. And I'm so proud of the work you've done.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. And so you mentioned your dad, which that is, the beauty of us talking today, right? Because we were supposed to talk, I think, early in the year, and, rescheduled. And then it hit me Father's Day. Perfect. Because the message that, I want you to share with our audience is about, a relationship with your daughter. So, speaking to your daughter, talking to her about the things that we talk about on this show, but then also in speaking to your daughter, you're also speaking to other women. I lost my dad when I was a young girl, so 12.
Wow.
So you're speaking to girls, women who may have lost their dads at that time, but you're giving a message, right? And so that's what today is about, and that's why it's so special for me. So we are dedicating this episode to Layla.
I love it.
So Layla, your dad loves you and loves Nigel as well.
Yes.
But so we're going to dedicate this episode to Layla, and so let me just go ahead and jump into it.
Sure.
Yeah. So, Stephen, why is it important for your daughter, Layla, a Black preteen, to have a platform to use her voice?
Wow, such a loaded question. um, and Leila just turned 11. So, as I hear you share, losing your dad at 12, I'm thinking through that lens, and I often say to people that I do everything I do each and every day, wasting not a minute of time, because I don't know if the
Yeah.
next day is promised. I don't even know if the rest of today is promised. I'm blessed that we have a daughter who is very introverted, speaks so much less than that. She's just a constant one that's listening to everything.
Yeah.
Complete opposite of her brother, who's more like me and charming and outgoing and just can't stop talking. But she's is really smart and competitive and just well-rounded, right? She can geek out on science and
Yes.
space, and at another time be very comfortable in our corner painting rocks. She does rock art that she calls Layla Rocks.
Oh, nice.
Or she could go play basketball. I took her to a graduation celebration for um, one of her friends' older brothers, and she went to the court to go shoot hoops with 8 boys and was on the winning team, right? And she can hold her own. And then there are times where she can absolutely be by herself and be comfortable with time alone. And I think all of that is extremely important when we're talking about, her developing her voice and having that platform to use it. She's still really naive in some ways, right? I remember being 10 or 11 and having to operate, in a middle class neighborhood in Kingston and jump on a bus at 6 a.m. in the morning to get to school in downtown Kingston. I would never put Layla
Right.
on a bus where we live in Maryland and say, hey, go find your way into DC, right? OOA every morning, and no one knows where you are till like 4 or 5 in the afternoon, right? So in many ways, she's a product of, parents who have done well and, are giving her everything, but I don't think she's as exposed to the world as we were, but I do believe that both my wife and I are cautious, right, to ensure she remains curious, and she is, and exposing her to as much as we choose to, and positioning her, right, to discover her own authentic voice. And that's important because I want her, if I have my way, as much as I'm able, I want to free her from having limiting beliefs of what's possible, right? Because there's power, right, in her knowing that she is able to do anything and do what she loves and what the world needs, but at the same time, respect and carry with pride like the legacy of everybody that came before her. Kristen has such deep roots in the US. There's a book written recently, and the name is slipping me right now, but we look back at the history of her family, especially here in Maryland, going back to slavery, that actually dictated so much of Maryland's slaves being freed.
Wow.
A time where we're talking about, Juneteenth just being, acknowledged as a holiday here. I just look at, the history that this young girl carries on her shoulders, and she's aware, but she's not yet aware of just how much that means. And I just think, in the world she's going to grow up in, right? We think of what it is today, just think of what, she'll be dealing with in 10 years. right? As an adult. And I just think, I want the world for her.
Yes.
But I want her to know that her voice is important, right? And whatever she chooses to do, that she has the ability, right, to give her magic to the world and be enough.
And I love that, because I was thinking about my son who's 19, and
Mm,
same situation, grew up privileged, if you will, if you want to use that word, and didn't
yeah.
have to worry about, catching a bus or doing a lot of things that we did, right? And like, God, how are you going to navigate, right? And he so impressed me going back to school. So he
Mhm.
has rented a home with two other guys. So
Wow.
he's back at school. He needed a, U-Haul and all of that. He's driving the U-Haul. I'm trailing behind him. He's driving it. And I'm looking. So then I got in it to drive it, to drop it off. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm afraid and nervous, and it's all big. And I'm like, my 19-year-old child just drove this new U-Haul for 90 minutes. No problem.
Yeah.
And just the things that he's doing, like every now and then he will impress me. And it's like, okay. Because you think that they're not listening, they're not
Oh
getting
no,
it,
they're
and certain
sponges.
things that they do, they demonstrate, like, oh my God, how are you going to survive? And then they do these things that are grown, right? They're grown up things. And I'm impressed by him. So, point is, your daughter's all right. She'll be all
She's all
right.
right. She's absolutely all right. I mean, I have no doubt in my mind that I'm probably a year off from having her be way smarter than I'll ever be. And my responsibility is just to keep nurturing, keep watering that seed, right? I tell her every
Absolutely.
day. If she came in here right now, I'd be like, "What does Daddy always say?" And she's, you're my greatest investment. And I tell her every day, I'm like, "Hey, you and your brother are my life's biggest investments."
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is so true, because I feel the same way about my son. And there was things that I didn't think I could do before
Mm,
he was born. And then after he was born, it was like these things are just happening. Those things that I didn't think I could do, I could accomplish. I
mm.
accomplished with ease after he was born. So our children, they put something in us, they change us, and we start moving mountains. you know
I love to say parenting is the hardest job in the world with no prior work experience.
Right, right. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And so with Trailblazers, you created Trailblazers.fm podcast to lift the voices of Black men and women entrepreneurs. What is your wish for your daughter in using your voice this way?
Yeah. I'm using my voice to teach her just what I touched on a second ago.
Mm-hmm.
I think both Layla and really any Black girl out there can do and be anything that they aspire to be. Um, whether that's the things that already exist and that we see today, or it's something that they will need to create and give
Yes,
to the world to make it a better place, right? Um, Trailblazers is that it's a platform to pour what my dear friend and champion of the podcast, Sean Dove, always say, pouring that motivational mission fuel, right? In the way of representation, of practical, actionable guidance, and tools that they can lean on and learn from and apply from the conversations that are embedded in this podcast to get ahead faster, um, and to be able to accomplish more. I think that's leadership, right?
mhm.
It's being able to pour everything you can into the next. Forget whether or not they're going to pass you, right? I tell my interns and I tell the people, a lot of young women who I'm training up in my org right now. I'm like, listen, take everything out of my head,
Yeah.
right? Get it all out of my head. If I can get you, to fast track my last 10 years inside of a year, that's golden, because now you're mid-20s, 30, and you can now move that much faster to your goals, right? And so I'm using my voice to do just that, right? For young Black girls, right? Making sure that they see representation of themselves in the people, you know, who I've interviewed on this platform. You know, Layla walks in here all the time, and I don't know if this is you shared a video at all anywhere, but over my left shoulder in my office is what Layla has actually termed my Hall of Fame, my podcasters Hall of Fame.
Okay.
And I have a series of mixed tiles from some of my favorite episodes and conversations I've shared. And, you know, she'll look up and she'll be like, who's that? Right. And every now and then she walks in, and I might be having, you know, a call, like in my mastermind, Minda, Patrice Washington, both over my shoulder, are part of my mastermind, or I'll have a conversation with somebody on that wall, and she's like, oh, that's Minda Harts, right? Or that's Patrice. And so, you know, I'm making her aware. She'll listen to conversations that I'll play while I'm driving them to school, or picking them up. And they're like, to your earlier point, I'll think I'm just listening, and then she might chime in and say, hey, you know, so based on what he said here, or she said here, and that's that representation, that's planting those seeds, right? That's that legacy at play.
Absolutely. And I'm sure, because I do remember, if I'm not mistaken, that what your daughter shares with Simone's daughter and vice versa is the STEM, right? You mentioned Layla is into STEM.
Yeah.
And I remember Simone mentioning something about Dr. McBuff stuff, and somebody like that. I think it's a Black doctor, and how much, you know, she appreciates that representation.
Yeah. Which is actually represented by a real life doctor, Dr. Maisha Taylor.
Oh.
And Dr. Maisha Taylor and her daughter, Haley Taylor Schlitz, were guests on the podcast on Trailblazers some time ago. And she homeschooled, Dr. Maisha Taylor homeschooled her kids. Her daughter, Haley Taylor Schlitz, was the youngest guest, I think, on Trailblazers. She's now probably 19. She's in law school.
Oh, that's awesome.
She's in law school at like 18 or 19 years old.
That is amazing. And so I'm thinking, you know, Layla probably really enjoyed the one young lady who was like a astrophysicist.
Yes.
And she was creating something. I know that she had, it may not have been a GoFundMe account, but she, you know, was crowdfunding something that she was working on. And so I just remember I was like, you know, walking and listening to that particular episode. I'm like, oh my God, this is amazing. You know, the things that she's doing. And if I'm not, she talked about her experiences as being one of the only, of course, in the different spaces that she was in, and having another Black woman who was along those lines, and that woman invested in her, poured into her, whatever, and she continued with what she's doing. But that's what your show is about, right? That's what, you know, my show is about, is providing those spaces, those platforms, so that there is that representation, so that people are able to share what they're doing, creating a sisterhood, a squad, and all of those things, and to be able to point and say, you know, someone's like, oh, you know, well, I want to learn more about this. Oh, episode 134. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can do that. Like, that's what that wall is behind you, that you're able to do that. And, you know, and I'm building up, you know, to that as well. And I'm starting to categorize my stuff. So if you want to know about, you know, we'll say Juneteenth or whatnot, then here, listen to this. You know, you want to learn about, you know, folks speaking here from Latinx, click here type thing. So yes. So yes, all of that for Layla and for Nigel.
And that's amazing, right? We need media. We need our own media to reframe the narrative that we're teaching. Not only our kids, we're talking about our kids in this conversation, but you know, I created the whole idea behind Trailblazers was Layla. When Layla was 4 years old, and I would pick her up in daycare, and I was looking at her then and thought about a time like now where, you know, she'd be a teenager, and while the mainstream media would tell her that she can aspire to be a musician, an athlete, you know, celebrity, I'm in a very progressive neighborhood in Maryland, and I'm looking around in my daycare classroom, and I'm bumping shoulders with Black excellence in every area, every industry, right? I'm seeing the CEO of this, company, or the head of the military. And, it's just people in different areas, people who are running their own business, but achieving excellence at highest level, pursuing their passion, and doing amazing things. And that was the light bulb moment. I was like, I want her to see this. I want her to see other people doing amazing things who look like her, sound like her, but widen that, the possibilities. And so, yeah, that was really the catalyst for me saying, you know what, I'm going to start a podcast talking about Black success.
And I love it. And I'm so thankful that you did, because I believe it was another guest, and I'm sure it was your guest, who she created. I don't know if it's yours or yours or Simone's, because again, I listen to you, Minda, and Simone. But this particular guest, she had started a magazine.
Yeah.
And I think it was online. It was based off of her, things going on in her community, and people were like, "Oh, you need to scale it, and you need to bring in like celebrities and so on and so forth." And if I'm not mistaken, last year she launched like her own network.
Yeah.
Was that your guess?
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and it's amazing, right? When we learn about these different stories and all the amazing things that, folks are doing, and it's just powerful to me. I just absolutely, I'm always just blown away by. And then now, I've kind of shifted to where I'm doing so much more conversations over live stream, and I'm excited about it because it invites this live dialogue with an audience. It's not as big as the reach of the podcast, but yet again, I'm rediscovering and creating these conversations, and it makes my heart happy. So
yeah, and you know what? And it's a purpose, and it's a journey, right? Because I even remember you saying something to me like yeah, it's a purpose and a journey. And, you're sharing with me about, it's not even about focusing on those metrics, which metrics are important. They have a purpose, but it's also on what is it that you're gifting to other people? What are you here to do? And so like for you created the space for your daughter with her in mind, because you wanted her to see representation. You wanted her to be surrounded. That was your why. Everything else is a bonus.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so I even think about it that way, myself. And, it's like, well, you're wanting to give this platform. And so as long as your heart is there, everything else will, happen the way that it's supposed to happen. So that's something that I hold on to.
That is such a gem right there. And I have content creators who come to me all the time concerned about, how do I increase my downloads? It's the number one question I'm asked. And, if somebody says, hey, I'm only, you often hear this, I'm only getting 200 downloads an episode. And I think to myself, Deneen, when I walk into a room to speak to 200 people, I get butterflies.
Yeah.
200 people is a lot of people in a room when you're getting on a stage.
Yeah, it is.
And so we have to put that in perspective, right? We get caught up when you look on a YouTube video and it has 1 million views. But you need to dial back. Yes. We all want 1 million views of our content. That would be fantastic. I'm not going to downplay the reach and the awareness and the impact of having that reach. However, also don't downplay 200 people that you are impacting, right? It could be 200 Laylas.
Yes.
In the room,
yes.
Right? That you are sharing a message, imparting, wisdom that goes on to change their life forever, right? If there's one episode in this entire archive of content that somebody would think was my favorite,
yeah,
they might say it was like Janice Brant Howroyd, right?
Mm-hmm.
But to me, one of the most impactful episodes was with Art Steele, right? Somebody who talked about estate planning, which is not a very fun topic.
Yeah, but it's important.
But it was so important and so impactful because and that episode was recorded probably 3 or 4 years ago. But even this past week, I had somebody reach out to me and say, hey, I'm so happy that episode helped us to establish an estate plan and a will and a trust. And I realized that one episode, because there are people who put an insurance policy in place, put a will in place, put an estate plan in place, the impact of that on families,
wealth building,
generations from now, right? Like 200 years from now, you might not know what Trailblazers.fm was, but you're a benefactor of that content.
Absolutely. And those are conversations we don't have. We don't have those conversations in our community. So for someone who, however they're introduced to Trailblazers, they come across that, that's valuable. Because again, we don't talk about that. That's not usually how our families, you know what I'm saying? Often we're the first ones who are, making, middle class, et cetera. So there's nobody that's talking to us about that and gifting and, like, oh, you're good, because you have a trust fund and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't happen. And, and I'm sure I probably heard it on one of your episodes, how some people, with families, when our children go to college, so either scholarship, maybe loans, it's not often that we have money to pay for college, right? And I could be generalizing, but that's just not necessarily the norm in our community. Whereas in other communities, that is the norm. Here, let me write this check. And when you graduate, you're getting a car and a house.
Right.
That's, and that's not what you hear in our community, but we need to hear more of that. So we need to listen to, Art Steele and other people and to learn about, well, how do we do that? What do we need to do to set ourselves up for that? So you mentioned, like, oh, I don't know if it's a video. So yes. So for those who are listening or watching, an intimate conversation is on YouTube as well as your favorite podcast platform. But make sure that you continue to check in, you subscribe, you share, and all of that. So you talk to a lot of people. You talk to people like often, right? On your podcast, in your business, your daughter, and I'm sure you come across women who don't recognize the power of their voices. You mentioned how Layla is kind of quiet and whatnot. So what are you saying to Layla? What are you saying to some of those other women to help them to recognize the power of their voices?
Yeah. I think about that. With Layla, Layla is much more inclined to do something outside of being an entrepreneur, but I am always planting those seeds in her from an early age, right? So probably 3 years ago, a past guest of mine, Kelly Leonard Taylor, asked me, actually, Tamika Montgomery, a past guest of ours who lives here in Maryland, reached out to me and said, hey, she homeschools 3 boys.
Oh.
And she was very entrepreneurial. She was actually under the Obama administration as the head of the SBA. And she said, hey, I'm putting together a kids business fair in our county. Do you think your daughter would want to take part? I said, she absolutely would not want to take part. Sign her up.
Sounds like me.
And, so since then, I've been teaching her about business and how to identify problems and create solutions to fill those voids and those needs. And I'm thinking, oh gosh, I wish I had thought about finding it because it is so awesome. And she literally wrote this. I wish I had thought about finding it beforehand, but I was like, hey, how do you articulate the problem that your rocks solve?
Oh.
right? Like, and I frame that like, what's the void and the need? And I'm paraphrasing, but
Mm-hmm.
she's, she ended up writing out this bit that says, you're sitting outside on your patio, working through, some paperwork, and your papers start to fly all over the place, and you think to yourself, man, I wish I had that Layla Rock.
Right? Oh my God, I love that. I
And
love it.
but I'm framing that right
Mm-hmm.
now, right? My wife and I are even to what we spoke about just a minute ago. My wife and I are teaching her about money, how
Mm-hmm.
to manage money, how to save money, how to invest money. And we've also been planting in her a spirit of gratitude. I think that's something I plant in the podcast, right?
Yes.
I've started every conversation off from a place of gratitude. And I think, especially in the season of life that we're in right now, where day to day, there's so much that we need, that we're lacking. But instead of focusing our energy on what we don't have, it's a shift of mindset to acknowledge and to be grateful for the blessings that we do.
Yes.
And so learning to appreciate her privileged life and all she's given. And I think that those themes run parallel to, I think those are things that we can all take away from, right? Take lessons away from, even if we're in our 40s and 50s right now. I think we are, and it's a message I'm sharing right now. I think at the time we're recording this, Deneen, there's so many people that are quitting their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yes. There are.
Um,
Yes.
and it's concerning for me because we look through the lens of either being a full-time employee or leader or a full-time entrepreneur. And there is so much opportunity in between
Mm-hmm.
those two ends of the spectrum, right?
Yes.
And I think we need to get clear on uh, our purpose and our meaning for what we hope to accomplish, and realize that, you know what, and I'm speaking specifically for Stephen E. Hart. I am a full-time employee and leader for a corporation. But I discovered several years ago that I am so much more
Yes.
than just this one career and this one job and this one paycheck. That paycheck allows me to take care of these two crumb snatchers and put them, through school and daycare and private school and, all the other million things that come up. But by way of my podcast, I'm also, a course creator. I've written a branding course. I derive multiple streams of income today, right? From my speaking, from my course, from my podcast sponsorship, and a number of merch and other channels. It's not equal, right? There are
Right.
varying degrees of where you pull in money in from. But you know what? I've discovered, and my wife, I encouraged her, hey, you want to become a executive leadership coach? Go do that. Get the employer to pay for it.
Yes.
In seasons like last year, where we never thought she'd be the one to get furloughed and did,
Mm.
she was able to go take on work as a coach and fill that void. And I think what we need to do is open our mindset today, right? To recognize the power of your knowledge, of your voice, of your experiences, and take the time to get clear on, what is it that's going to give my life meaning? Where
Right.
am I trying to get to?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just for the career. The career might help you get there, but where are you trying to get to, right? What's your destination? What destination are you putting in your Google Maps, right? And getting clear on that, and then being able to say, you know what, this is what I want to accomplish, and this is who I want to serve.
Mm.
to do that. And then, you know what? Don't worry about the how. The how is none of your business, as Les Brown would say, right?
Yeah.
Just understand what that is and where you're trying to get to. And life tends to bend towards, you having that clarity. And, so kind of winded response, but that's what I'm teaching her, and that's what I'm hoping to impart to a lot of Black women, actually, because I get approached by majority of my audience are represented by Black women, and also the people I teach.
No, and so everything you said was so important, because I'm hearing you and I'm thinking about a book that I'm reading now. It's a book, it's been out for a while, but I came across it, and it's Power something, and it's by I think the person is a Buddhist. And in here he talks a lot about power. He talks a lot about getting clear and focusing on what it is that you want, and then also relating how what you want should also be about helping other people, right? Not just about you, but also about people, and that you're not wanting to chase money and those type of things, because those are fleeting. But that happiness and that joy, and where that comes from, and just the different things that tie into it. And so he talks a lot about focusing on the now. And people have said that, different people, you talk to your coaches and therapists and whatever, and they talk about, well, focus on where you are, the now, et cetera. And you've heard that before, but now it's resonating differently reading this book. And he even goes to say, hey, if you're making a cup of tea, focus on that cup of tea, be all present in that cup of tea, and tying into mindfulness, right? So you talked about that, power, you talked about getting clear about what it is you want. And I say that to people, like, back into that. You need to know where it is you're going, what you said, put it in your GPS. You need to know that destination, and then the getting there, right? And the world does, conspire to make those things happen for you, and it falls into your lap and into your place. And I'm finding that out with the podcast. People have asked me, well, what do you see and next? And I'm like, hey, I'm on this journey. I'm kind of like in a passenger seat in a way. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm open to it. I started, it was a panel first, then it became a podcast. Now it's YouTube, you know what I'm saying? And then the beautiful thing is, what I do in my day job, my career, is also in alignment for women of color. So I run our program for women of color.
Wow.
You said, when that thing that you want to do, and you were made to do it this season in your life, everything aligns with that. So
listen, I hope whoever's listening to the podcast hits that replay, 15-second, because there's a gem in what you just said, right? For one, getting super clear. I said it just a minute ago about getting clear on that purpose, right? And there's a purpose Venn diagram that's out there. If you Google search purpose Venn diagram, it comes up, and it's kind of the apex of what you love doing, what you're good at, what I call your superpowers, right? So what you're good at, what you love doing, what the world needs, and then also what you can get paid for. Because sometimes creatives especially, we dial into what we are really good at and what we love doing, right? That's the passion play,
right?
And we're not thinking about how we're going to pay the bills, right? We're just dialed into that, or we're dialed into what we love doing and what we're good at, but the world don't need it.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll invest our life savings building a business on something that we love and we're good at, but ain't nobody needs. Right. And then things fall apart. So the thing we have to look at is that full circle, right? And really get clear on, it doesn't have to all be equal, right? It doesn't mean that you need to be a millionaire when we talk about getting paid for, but it needs to support what you're doing, right? If you're going to make it your full time, or if not, right? I don't think that, you know, what we talked about before, I don't think it has to be something where it's either end of the spectrum. You don't have to be a full-time employee or a full-time entrepreneur. You can be a full-time employee for the rest of your life and still pursue some of these things. I hate to say side hustle,
Yeah.
right? Because it could just be other things that occupy your energy and your time and fulfill some of what you're doing, and make the work life a little less stressful because you have other things that give your life joy.
Yes.
But you know what? If, hey, you know, when I'm doing my branding course and, you know, I'm able to sell, you know, X amount of seats in it, you know, that's lifestyle income because I'm gainfully employed. So now I can really just focus on helping people, right? It doesn't have to keep the lights on,
right,
if you will. So you can start to look at those things, right? I would say, you know, embracing the dream. And I tell people all the time, man, you know, we have so many ideas that run through our mind, but we never write them down. We never write them down. And so until 2016, I wasn't writing down these ideas. I was just going on the next shiny lights that I saw. And when I started, you know, in June 26th of 2016, I sat down and wrote out what I now call my big, hairy, audacious goals.
Yeah.
And I got very clear on what it was I was trying to do with Trailblazers, with speaking, with my course, with a book that I eventually will write. And I wrote down like, hey, you know, at the time I was like 4 months into podcasting, not even. And I said, I want to speak to 1,000 people on my podcast. I want to write a best-selling book. I want to speak on a stage. No, I sold a business back in 2011 and I was working for 7 years, pretty much from home, right? I was the ideal COVID framed, you know, mind, because I was just in my basement trading, you know, trading the markets. And my clients would be, you know, talk to them over Skype. Like, I wasn't seeing people in person. I got back out of that business and I couldn't talk in a crowd. I'd get so nervous, you know, because I just wasn't dealing with crowds anymore. So the idea of me setting a goal and saying, I'm going to get on a stage and I'm going to talk to several thousand people was audacious.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'm hoping that some of this spins off too, again, to Layla, but I'm teaching professionals today, like, yo, you know what? You know, embrace those dreams, but you got to move the dream from the idea in your head, get it down on paper, because you can't edit the idea in your mind. So you have to write it down so you can flesh it out, so you can attach a date to it and now move it from a dream or a wish to a goal. And you can start to task out what needs to happen.
Yeah, to get you there.
To get you to achieving and checking that box.
So while we're talking about dreams, have you had a dream deferred? And if so, what did you do about it?
Last year, as much as I've I don't know if it's deferred, but you know, even as we're talking, just thinking in the vein of the conversation we've had to this point, had that goal to interview 1,000 people on Trailblazers, and for 205 consecutive weeks, smooth sailing, right? I say smooth sailing. I'm an indie podcaster, right? Like there's all kinds of headaches being independent, right? And working a full-time job. But by the grace of God, for 4 years, I was able to put up an episode every Monday morning at 5 a.m. Eastern without fail. And we get to December of 2019, and I get a call on a Saturday morning, 6:30 in the morning, that, you know, my dad wasn't well. And turns out I got on a plane the very next morning to Jamaica 4 days before Christmas, suffered a stroke. And I was in a hospital and with him for a couple of weeks, got him home. You know, I literally am on the floor of his TV nook, and my editor is messaging me like, I need next week's episode.
Shout out to Annette. Right?
Well, Annette's a blessing, let me tell you. But no, Annette does a lot of my show notes up to that point. But we had a podcast editor that was amazing. But you know, and if times where I kind of ran up against time, you know, he would get that thing done for me in a heartbeat. But I didn't even know it at the time. You know, I laid on the floor, like bawling my eyes out, blood pressure through the roof, not knowing what was going to happen. Right. And I paused the podcast in that season, and who knew? You know, it was 8 months. COVID hit, kids are home, my wife gets injured, like if it could go wrong, it did.
It went wrong, yeah.
It went wrong, and you know, I found myself in the couch just trying to survive, you know, trying to deal with the mental health was just not right. I was dealing with anxiety, panic attacks, just dealing with my own life. Forget the podcast, forget, you know, work, forget, I was no use to anybody. But, you know, when we talk about, you know, this dream, it was this North Star. It was having those things written down. It was me being able to come back to this months and months later when I was somewhat stable. I still say I'm going through this today, a year and a half later, but I got back to a place where I was able to look up and I was able to look at what was written down. And I was able to say, is this still the goal?
Yeah,
you know,
right?
Still want this for you and for others. And it was, but I did 12 episodes, 15 episodes in the fall. And I realized I wasn't ready for the podcast. You know, listen, every time that we put out an episode, there's so much that goes into putting out content, right? There's having these conversations, but there's a post work and the editing that, you know, you do. And I just wasn't ready for that. And so, but I wasn't ready to quit. And so I didn't quit. I shifted. And I made a decision to continue to do the interviews, but to do them over video, over a live stream. And, you know, and so my dream, in some ways, you know, took a pause, right? And I deferred it to January of 2021, right? When I was able to resume these interviews, because the goal was to interview Black professionals and entrepreneurs and leaders. It wasn't to podcast.
Right, exactly.
Right. And so, you know, I'm still living out this dream, and it might not be in front of, you know, 4,000 or 5,000 people per episode. Right now, it might be 300 to 500 people an episode. Right. So I've left a lot of my community a void right now. But you know what? I'm fulfilled because I'm still pursuing, you know, my heart's, you know, work, right? That dream that is still within me. And I'm still impacting the lives of many. So yeah.
Well, that's the focus, right? Like we said, getting clear about what it is that you want to do, your purpose, and then how you get into that, or how you back into that. It's going to pivot, it's going to change, it's going to shift, and that's okay. And that's the thing that we have to recognize, is that it's okay. You know, that, yeah, you wanted to do consecutive, you wanted to do this, you did that, but life happens. And you do need to respond to life when it happens, because otherwise it will just shut you down, right? And so again, it's fine. You're still doing what it is that you wanted to do. You're just doing it differently. And then you're showing other people that it's okay. it's okay to respond to life when it happens. And for me, so the question that I asked about being deferred, that comes from my sister's book that she wrote, Dreams Deferred. And my sister, I lost her in October. So I've incorporated her into my podcast. And so listening to you and then reflecting, it was actually the Wednesday before her funeral was my interview with Minda. And it was a technical thing. We finally got together. And then I was like, you know what, Minda, this is what I'm dealing with right now. Is it okay if we reschedule? And she was fine with that. Right? I couldn't. I just couldn't do it. Like my mind was not even there. Now I did end up, doing me just talking and just kind of sharing where I was, but it's okay to take a pause. Like you don't have to keep running. Sit down when you need to sit down. And, and your dad, because I know about, things with your dad and how, he's better now and he's painting and all those, that kind of great stuff. But you got to stop and take care of what's most important at that time. And even now, like boundaries, I'm really big on boundaries now.
And I
am setting boundaries just to set boundaries. You know what I'm saying? Because it's so important, and it's important for our mental health, right? Something I was dealing with today is something I've been dealing with for a minute, and I just kind of worked around it. Let me just work around it. Let me change this, okay, let me scoot over here, without having to go head on with it. And so I made a decision. That person is not more important than me. I'm more important. And so I'm going to go ahead and address this in a way, not only for me, but for everybody else that this person is coming in contact with. Because they are wreaking havoc with everybody. And so I'm having to speak up for myself, for those, around me and those that are going to come behind me. And so once I actually pause
and for the person that's wreaking havoc, because sometimes they don't even realize.
Yeah. And and I say, and it's funny, I think this person is kind of like Lioness or something from Charlie Brown, where, that smoke and stuff around, but it's more so like you've seen those scenes in the movie where the person may be walking down the street and there's like the road behind them is like crushed and cars are falling through. Yeah. It's kind of like that, and I'm falling through and I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that.
I'd be the first to tell you, before, and I've had so many conversations on Trailblazers about mental health prior to my dad's stroke. And I sort of relate it to when I would have conversations with parents prior to being a parent. And I would hear what they're saying, but I couldn't process it. Right? You just don't get it till you're in the club.
Right.
Right? As a parent. Like when I apologize if I'm knocking on somebody, but when somebody tells me, I don't have kids, but I have a cat or a dog, and they try to relate that to parenting a child,
right?
And it's like, we are so disconnected, right? And that for me, I heard people crying out and saying, hey, I'm dealing with mental health challenges, but that wasn't me, right? And so, when I returned from Jamaica, my wife said, hey, I got 2 appointments for you to see your doctor and to go talk to somebody. And I was like, woman, what you talking about?
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to talk to nobody. And I had to check myself. And she was like, Stephen, it's covered by our insurance. If it's not for you, then, you don't have to pursue it. And I didn't realize in that moment that Kristen was saving my life.
Yeah.
Right. Because I needed that. To your point, I had to shut it down. I had to pause and take care of my mental health, building the strength, getting the tools to be able to handle the anxiety and the depression of the season, and understand kind of how things would resume and how I'd progress forward from it, because podcasting had become a part of my identity and my journey. And so while I had to pause from podcasting, it was like, but that's all I do. for the last 4 years. I talk to people. So what the heck am I doing sitting on, on a couch watching Netflix? I don't know how to do that. Right. But again, it was getting back up, embracing those dreams, getting back on the horse and looking at what was written down and then saying, hey, how do we move this thing to start serving people again? Because that's my life, all is said and done. I'm about planting seeds and watering them.
But you're able to plant additional seeds. Seeds that is so needed right now, right? So much that fertilizer is needed right now because so many people over the last year or so really need to talk to somebody professionally. And you don't know what is preparing you for it. So like with me, my sister passed in October, I started seeing a grief counselor. I didn't know I was going to lose my aunt in January. I didn't know that my cousin's 30-year-old son was going to die in March. I didn't know all of these things were going to happen. And so by me already having those conversations with a grief counselor, I already have that support system in place. And for her to kind of help me through some things, because I've been the person who I would put things on a shelf. When I lost my dad, okay, my dad died, and that was that, and kept it moving. But you don't really ever keep moving. You know what I'm saying? It's always there. It's going to surface in different ways. And so finally, I'm like, you know what? I don't want to do that this time when my sister passed. I'm like, I don't want to do that. I want to get the support that I need to get. Right. And I will tell anybody, talk to somebody, whatever you want to call them, therapist, coach, whomever, talk to someone who's their profession. I call her my person. Right. And they're part of your board. They're part of your squad. You need that. You need those people because your girlfriends, your boys, whatever, they're only equipped to do so much.
Yeah. I mean, I love my wife, but she ain't trying to have that conversation with me. Right. Like, and she's happy that I had, she's the person that put me, in a position to have a person.
Yeah.
And, this morning I had that conversation and it, the thing I love is I'd love to say, a therapist, again, whatever you choose to call them, whatever label you choose to use. I love the fact that I can get on a call and I can be like, you know what, this is what I'm dealing with in this moment. Right. And she can help me look through a lens that is free of opinion or, perspective in my family that's skewed one way or the other. She's just objective and she can hand me a tool in one call, or we can sit down and think more openly about, all the possibilities in another call to handle, what's creating the cloud.
Yeah.
And I always come away from these calls like, just free, and it lifts so much off. And she's not trying to fix me, right? In a way that, she's just, I love to just say, hey, you coughing right now, or, God forbid you have a cough or a fever, you run into the doctor to make sure you don't have COVID. Right. Or that you're not sick. And, and then even if you're not sick, you schedule an appointment with your doctor, hopefully, once a year or periodically. Just to make sure all is good. And, that person for me is that person when I'm sick and, I'm dealing with anxiety, she's there.
Yeah.
And even when I'm good, I've been good for the last few months, but we get on the phone and we talk, and she just makes sure that, okay, you know what, check in. Let's just make sure all is good.
Absolutely. And so, running things by. Yeah.
And so I encourage it, for those who are dealing with, some challenges, or you've been thinking about it, just try it.
Yeah. And even if it's not a challenge, just go ahead and have that conversation, because you can run things past the person. They're trained experts, right? And to give you a different perspective. And so early on, she, sent me a link for, oh my God, like emotional words. filling words or something. I forget what it's called, but whatever it is, it's on my phone. Like if I go to my phone, it's right there. But every time we talk, she's like, okay, now pull out your list.
Uh,
And so, what are you feeling right now? And so, she does help me
yeah.
to come up with different words, right?
Mhm.
Because I think sometimes we probably have limited vocabulary, just certain words like, oh, I'm angry and this, that, and the other. It may not be anger. It
Mm,
actually may be something else. It could be, angst, or it could be anxiety or whatever. But let's look at these different words to be able
mhm,
to say, oh, you know what? It might be this, or I don't know what it is, but I'm describing it. And she
mhm,
may say, well, I don't think it's that. I think it might be more this.
mhm,
And I'm like, oh, you're right. And I appreciate that. Because often we're, in our feelings, we're in our emotions, and we're thinking a certain way. Because again, with our understanding, we're not the experts, but she is, or he is, or they, that person is. And that's what they're there for. So,
absolutely. I listen, as you're saying this, I'm thinking of, last October, I went down to Florida. My dad was with my sister and had a good trip, celebrated his birthday, uh, first birthday following the initial stroke. And I get in my car. I'm in Tampa, and I get in my car and I said, you know what? I'd stopped like twice on my way. I was driving down because of COVID. I didn't want to get in a plane.
yeah.
And so I drove to Tampa. It's like a 15-hour trek
Oh, wow.
back home. I get in my car, and the last day before I left, we were talking. My sister and I were talking about stuff related to my dad's business. We're still winding up a 36-year-old business
Mhm.
back in Jamaica, and we're dealing with just all the stress of his winding up everything back home. And I didn't realize that anxiety was upon me, but I get in my car at 5 a.m. and said, I'm going to take a straight shot back to Maryland in a day and get home before 8. I just needed to get through the South and Trump country,
Mhm.
you know. And so I jump in a car at 5 a.m. Deneen, at 5:30, I thought I was having a heart attack.
Oh,
I pull
no.
off on the side of the road, and I'm having chest pain, and I'm like, what is happening right now? And nobody's picking up the phone. And I'm like, do I need to go to the doctor, or is my head just, playing games with me? And I find some gospel playlists and I turn up the radio and I'm praying to God and I hit the road. And it kind of calms down and I'm going later in the day, kind of feel like the onset of it again. The next day, I got home the next day, I'm feeling the onset of it again. And Kristen's like, dude, you having anxiety attacks. And I'm like, is that what this is? And I call my therapist and she said, and she just broke it down,
Yeah.
right? She broke it down and she helped me realize that anxiety in that moment, she said, anxiety is you dwelling on the
Mm.
what ifs of a future event that don't exist.
Right.
And more often than not, that future what if that you're playing out is the absolute worst case scenario that could play out.
Right.
And so the anxiety doesn't exist where you place yourself in the present moment. And so she equipped me with tools whenever this came on. For me, it's getting outside, right?
Hmm.
And it's being able to touch the leaves in the trees and, breathe in fresh air and be in a present moment. But I was equipped with the tools to handle the anxiety. And so, I still have feelings of it that come on. Even in the past week and a half, I've had anxiety, filled moments, but now I'm equipped.
Yes.
Now I'm equipped to know, what? I feel this coming on and I know what that is. Right. And let me go take care of this. And I've not really had these crazy bouts where I feel like I'm gonna have a heart attack. I can tell that, my mind is winding up and I can tell it, some choice words back and say, hey,
Right.
not now,
Exactly. Not
get behind,
now. Yes.
Get behind me.
Yes, change it, change those thoughts, because we do have that power in that control, and it's a choice that we have to make, right? And then you have to keep doing it, because you can do it for one time and think that that's it. It's not, because it's
It's
going to
not.
creep right back up. Like, oh,
Yeah.
okay, I'm back. So you
Yeah.
have to keep at it. You have to practice that, and that's what it's about. And that's also what I'm reading about in that book. Same type of thing. Those thoughts start to creep in, like what you're going to say to a person, how you're going to future, like, okay, this is what I'm going to say, but you're giving that situation, that person, your energy, your attention, when you could put that on something else. That something else could be
Yes.
on you. That something else could be on going outside, touching those leaves. It could be playing, with your children. It could be just sitting and listening to music. It could just really be doing nothing other than dwelling on that, So yes, so big ups to therapists and counselors and those people who are equipped to help us to navigate life, because that's what it is. And honestly, folks, reach out to somebody. You know what I'm saying? Don't wait until you have a situation to now you're crawling like, oh, I need help. No, go ahead and set those things in motion now, and just have those conversations, because you never know, how that person can benefit you. And another thing to know too, you may have to keep trying different people. Like it needs to be a vibe. If you're not vibing with that first person, don't just say, oh, this is not for me. No, that person is not for you. Go find you somebody else, because again, just like in relationships, that first dude you meet, that first woman, they're not it. Sometimes it happens, but more often than not, you have to go through and get to know, it is a relationship. So with your therapist as well.
And don't just set the limits. When I was looking at the therapist, I had several friends like, oh, you should get a guy, or oh, you should get a girl, or you should find somebody who's black, or you should find somebody who is XYZ. And I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna see who God places before me. And to your point, it is very important that you have that connection.
Absolutely.
But who knew, he's gonna place me with the person he placed me with, because we are complete polar opposites in every single way. But there's such incredible parallels with the way we think. But on the surface, I would be like, oh, heck no, that's not my person. But God has humor, right? And it's funny, like I'll talk to people about marriage, and Kristen and I are polar opposites in so many ways, right? Layla and I are polar opposites. She's the mirrored image of her mom. But God's humor, we connect and we thrive.
I love that. No, that's awesome. And so you just have to connect, and like you said, God knows what we need before we know it, and we don't necessarily know it. So just go for it and see what happens, and give it a couple of tries or whatnot.
Yeah.
So bonus, many Black people will celebrate Juneteenth, the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. We kind of talked about that a little bit this weekend. Although Jamaica made you, what is the relevance of Juneteenth for you and to you? And Father's Day will also be celebrated this weekend. So what's the best part of being a father other than being able to invest in your children?
So on the Juneteenth side, it means a lot. As you touched on, I'm a product of parents growing up in Jamaica. But I'm the father of 2 children and a husband to a wife who is very clear, history, being the product of slaves right here in Maryland. And even reading recently about, some of their greats, right? Who fought for their freedom right here and were denied several times over. And Kristen's the product of slaves who were employees of Georgetown University, the place that her mom's now worked for 35 years, where she graduated as an alum.
Wow.
And there's just so much there, but to Juneteenth, it's big, right? It's big in light of that freedom. That I still feel like, it's more of a milestone marker,
Mm-hmm.
right, on a journey. We're still fighting for that freedom today,
Right.
in many ways, but it's a big marker that impacts my life through. It might not necessarily be me directly, but the three closest people to me are very much impacted by that, right? And by way of that, it impacts me as well. So I'm really excited. I'm actually looking forward to having a great conversation as well in live stream on Friday to kind of celebrate Juneteenth. And my mother-in-law's birthday is actually this Friday, so we're
Oh,
gonna be
wow.
together this weekend and celebrate Father's Day. So yeah, June is just a crazy month filled with birthdays. And Father's Day, it's special to me, for the opportunity to still have my dad here,
Yeah.
even a shell of himself, is special to me. Um, it's been such a challenging season, but I'm grateful that he is still able to walk and talk despite not necessarily being able to remember too much of a conversation we would have, or the number of challenges that we still have, but he's still here, and he's here now, in the States. And what that means is, where he was busy before running a business, he's now spending time between my sister and I. And Layla and Nigel are able, even in the shell of who their granddad is, able to glean insights and share in experiences with him. And I get to both take part and be witness
Yeah.
to some of those exchanges. And that's really important to me in light of all that we spoke about, with just that family, right? And that's wealth passing on, right? Not monetary wealth,
Right.
right? But
Wealth is so
there's
much
wealth.
more than money. Yeah,
It
and that's
is.
another thing, right? So wealth is so much more than money that we don't necessarily focus on that because we just think about that money, right? We don't think about the legacy and what we're
Mhm.
passing on. And like you said about your dad being a creative, like you got that from him. And it, recently I was reflecting, like, you know what? Like, okay, I'm doing a podcasting. I'm really, wanting to really just get creative with the YouTube. And then I thought about, I get that from my dad because
Mhm.
my dad was in entertainment, right? He had his
Mm.
own record company, record label back in the day.
Wow.
And, and people would say, oh, you're like your dad, you had that hustling spirit or whatever. But I'm not one who, let me just jump off and do the, be an entrepreneur. That wasn't me. Like, I've been fine with working for a company.
Mhm.
I have been, you know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? But now I'm starting to think, oh, yeah, and to reflect on those things that you get from your family. Like, you do certain things because of somebody else, like they gifted that to you. I'm going to call it a
Mhm.
gift. So your dad gifted the creativity to you and everything that you're doing around that. And then, what my dad imparted in me. And then, so, going back to you, you talked about your course that you've
Mhm.
created
Yeah.
and you have something coming up soon, right?
I do. We're working on a launch. We have a launch coming up mid-July, and I've done this course is something I've put together over the last 3+ years. It's something that spurred from looking at amazing people who I wanted to share their stories on Trailblazers. And yet I would Google search that person, and more often than not,
Mm.
what I found would leave me indifferent, and it'd end up in that folder in Gmail that you never go back to.
Right.
If it was somebody pitching me, and if not, if it was somebody I was thinking about, I just move on. And I thought, after a while, it felt sad
Mm.
that there are so many people being passed upon. If I was just this small independent podcast, I imagine, the opportunities being missed by mainstream media or career opportunities. And so I created this course to help professionals build a personal brand. And initially it was geared much more to creatives and entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
But especially in the last couple of years, leaders, by way of the pandemic, are realizing the need for their own digital footprint, because everything is really now shifting, right, to you having a digital, work environment going forward. And so, taking in the people who I speak to and serve, being Black professionals, taking in, I'm a marketing leader by day, in the world of cybersecurity, and manage a pretty large curriculum. So I have a mind for marketing and branding, by profession. But I took all of that, as well as the experiences of building and growing an amazing podcast. I started coaching friends and clients, people like Minda, Craig DeBarbo, Sean Dove, and a bunch of others that have gone through my courseware and coaching. And I've reverse engineered a process that we call the Trailblazers method. But it helps, walk people through 3 stages, 12 steps that, the stages being laying the foundation, framing your brand, and the third stage, creating that value, the multiple streams of income and the wealth that we discussed before.
Yeah.
And really not just building a personal brand, but becoming a brand in demand. And so the program is called Brand in Demand. And if anyone is listening and has an interest in learning more, we're doing a really amazing 6-part video series leading up to the launch of the course. And so they could sign up to watch that series over at brandindemand.co. It's brandindemand.co. And you have any other questions, about any of that, feel free to reach out to me in the DMs. I'm most active on the gram and on Twitter and on LinkedIn, and you can find me anywhere at Stephen A. Hart. But yeah, I'm really excited about this upcoming launch.
Yeah, it's exciting. And when I look at your website, it is amazing. Like from very beginning, like all of your pictures are like glossy. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's nice. I love it. So for those who are somewhat interested in your brand, even if you're just a little bit, check out his video series and go ahead and check out the course as well. But yes, Stephen is amazing. I've been, an admirer of his for a few years. Again, as I mentioned earlier, I was introduced to him through Minda Harts podcast and Simone E. And so they're the trifecta for me. Those are the 3 that I'll have, the podcasts that I have on rotation, and learning so much, just so much. And we're like a family, right? We,
Yes.
look out for each other here and there. I had shared earlier that I'm a contributor of a book, Upward, and it's through Simone Morris. And so that's what we do, and that's what it's about, right? Stephen talked a lot about Black excellence, and that's what we strive towards, to be excellent for ourselves, for our families, and then for all of you. So Stephen and I have talked. We've been around the world. It's as if it was just him and I, like just catching up, old friends, and y'all just, voyeurs and whatnot. so we're gonna bring it to a close. But Stephen, before we say goodbye, what would you like to leave our audience with?
Listen, whatever it is that you feel, maybe you're listening to this conversation and I've stirred thought around identifying your purpose. I think all too often I ask people, what are you leaving the world when you leave here? Get clear on that. Right, coming back to it, get clear on what you're good at, get clear on what you love to do and what the world needs and what you could get paid for. And when you're clear on that, really identify who it is that you could serve with that, whatever that is, and just take the first step. Right, set a date, take the first step. Doesn't have to be big, doesn't have to be perfect. Remove any limiting obstacle that's in the way today when you're setting those goals. Don't worry about the fact that maybe you don't have the money to do that big dream today, or you don't have the size of an audience to start that podcast tomorrow. I didn't, right? But I, at the time, but you take that first step and you take the next step and you just keep moving. And again, the world has a way of getting out your way, right? All the obstacles will get out your way and things will happen. It won't happen overnight.
Yeah.
But it will happen. So just get clear on finding your purpose and your vision.
Well, Stephen A. Hart, thank you so much for lending your voice to an intimate conversation with women of color, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Deneen. It's great talking to you.
Same here. Bye.